The most important piece of equipment in terms of tone production on the trumpet is the mouthpiece. So let's take a brief overview of all the components and then go back through and dissect each one. The first part of the mouthpiece is the rim or rim contour. This is the portion that comes in contact with your lips. Next we have the cup, and we'll talk later about all the different shapes and sizes of various cups. The portion of the mouthpiece between the rim and the cup is called the bite. The smallest opening of the mouthpiece, where the air and sound will pass through, is called the bore. The portion of the mouthpiece between the bore and the cup is called the throat. As that bore begins to get larger, it opens up into the back bore, and that is a taper from small to large. And then the outside of the back bore is called the shank, and this comes in contact with the mouthpiece receiver. As you begin to advance in your trumpet playing, I encourage you to move away from the mouthpiece that came with your trumpet. Many times that mouthpiece is something similar to a Bach 7C and is designed for younger players with smaller mouths and smaller lips. So as you get older and mature in your playing, it's important to look at the different types of mouthpieces that are out there and find the one that suits you the best. This is a very personal endeavor, so you don't need to play the mouthpiece that works for Phil Smith or Wynton Marsalis. You need to find the mouthpiece that is just right for you. So let's talk about all the different aspects and how they affect your sound. First, we have the rim and rim contour. As I mentioned before, this is the part of the mouthpiece that comes in contact with your lips. While this aspect of the mouthpiece may not change the sound a great deal, it does have the largest impact on your comfortability. It is extremely important for you to find a mouthpiece that is comfortable on your lips. Some rim contours are very flat, which certain people like that feeling better than others. Others are very rounded. Some have a high point of that rounded rim near the bite. Some have that high point near the outside of the rim. It just depends what feels most comfortable for you. Sometimes we also have a rim that is very wide. That's particularly helpful for people who have thicker lips. And then we have rims that are very narrow, maybe for people who have thinner lips. This can also affect the flexibility on the trumpet, depending on that rim contour and rim width. Again, you'll need to do a lot of trial and error to find which one works best for you. The bite of the mouthpiece will also affect how comfortable that mouthpiece feels on your lips. If the mouthpiece bite is too sharp, you may feel that your lips are tender while playing or after playing, assuming that you're not using too much mouthpiece pressure. Some people have noticed that with a sharp bite, the articulation becomes clearer and more precise. However, this can reduce the ease of flexibility. Now, if your articulation is already very clear, but your flexibility needs some help, you may want to go for a more rounded bite. So again, it's personal preference, and it's a little bit of give and take. Most people find something that has an equal balance between those two. The most important part of the mouthpiece that affects tone quality is the cup. And we have two basic shapes of cups. We have a V-shaped cup and a U-shaped cup, or bowl-shaped cup. Depending on your style of playing, you may find that one of these cups suits you better than another. For me, in general, I've found that the V-shaped cup provides a warmer tone, a rounder articulation, and slightly better flexibility. The bowl-shaped cup, or U-shaped cup, for me, provides a brighter sound with a more pronounced articulation and slightly stiffer flexibility. It just depends on your preference. But regardless of the two styles of cups, one principle is generally true, and that is the shallower the cup, the brighter the sound. The deeper the cup, the warmer the sound. Now maybe you've heard of cheater mouthpieces or lead mouthpieces. Contrary to popular belief, these mouthpieces do not give you higher notes on the trumpet automatically. There is no substitute for good old hard work and embouchure development to get those notes with security. So be sure to check out my other videos on embouchure development and different skills and exercises to work on to develop that. But those lead mouthpieces can be very helpful when we're playing in a jazz band or playing pops music with an orchestra or band. That shallower mouthpiece will give us a brighter tone to cut through the ensemble without having to work so hard. Just make sure that you're using the appropriate cup for the appropriate style that you are wanting to convey. So if you're doing solo work in a more intimate setting or playing in a small coffee bar with a jazz combo, you may want to use a deeper cup that will provide a warmer, more intimate sound. But I encourage you to experiment with all different shapes of cups to find which ones work best for you in different situations. Another factor to consider regarding the cup is the cup diameter. In general, a cup diameter that is large will produce a bigger and fuller sound. A cup diameter that is smaller will produce a more compact sound. It just depends on the style of music you're playing. But beware of a couple of things as you're sampling these different cup diameters. If the diameter is too large, then your range and endurance will be sacrificed. If the diameter is too small, then it's less forgiving when our lips swell inside the mouthpiece and our response and articulation can be sacrificed. So it takes a good bit of trial and error, and beware of the immediate satisfaction of finding a mouthpiece that sounds good. Make sure you're trying it out for a couple of weeks in all the different situations before you make your final assessment. The throat shape or contour is determined mostly by the shape of the cup. If the cup is V-shaped, then that throat will be more rounded and smooth. If the cup is a U-shaped cup or a bowl-shaped cup, then that throat will most often be sharp. If you have a sharp throat, that typically will mean that your flexibility is a little bit stiffer and might slot a little bit better, and the articulation will be more pronounced, very similar to a sharp bite. And also, if you have a more rounded throat, then that flexibility may be a little bit easier, may not slot as well, and also the articulation can be a little bit more rounded. But you'll want to test that out for your own playing. The bore and back bore of the mouthpiece have the greatest overall effect on the volume of sound. The mouthpiece bore is the narrowest point of tubing on the entire trumpet. Therefore, it's going to be the point of greatest resistance. Now, most mouthpieces will come with a size 27 bore. And all this is a drill bit size that has the number 27. So if you want to test the size of your mouthpiece bore, you can pick up a drill bit kit at your hardware store. If you want to change the size of your mouthpiece bore, I recommend going to the music store and have a professional take care of it. Do not attempt to do that at home on your own. Now, in general, the larger the size of the mouthpiece bore, the bigger and fuller the sound will be. The narrower the bore, the more compact the sound will be. It just depends on your style and preference. Remember that as that bore gets larger, there will be less resistance, which you may prefer. But if it gets too large, then you have to use more air and more muscles in your embouchure to control the tone and the intonation. So there's a definite balance to find there. Most classical players and even jazz players that are not playing lead prefer a size 23 or 24. But it really is personal preference. Remember, if you open that bore up too large, you can never close it back down. You'll have to buy a new mouthpiece. So proceed with caution. The back bore is slightly more tricky to describe and understand than the bore. As you can see in the diagram, the back bore begins at the end of the bore and then gradually gets larger toward the end of the mouthpiece. The back bore is measured in terms of the rate of its taper. So if it has a very fast taper, meaning it gets larger sooner, then the tone can be bigger and fuller. But the upper notes have a tendency to be a little bit sharper, and the lower notes have a tendency to be a little bit flatter. Now, if that taper is a more closed and a tighter taper, then the tone has a tendency to be more compact, and the upper notes can be a little bit flat, and the lower notes can be a little bit sharp. Now, this depends entirely on the way you play your instrument. And so everyone can be affected a little bit differently. But that back bore will affect the tone and intonation slightly. And it's the last part of the mouthpiece that I consider in determining what type of mouthpiece will work best for me in any given situation. Some of you may have noticed in my other videos that I use a mouthpiece that looks a little bit different. This mouthpiece is made by Peter Pickett of Pickett Brass and has a top that is made out of clear acrylic. While this material doesn't change the tone quality at all, I've found that it does change the feel on my lips. A silver-plated mouthpiece or gold-plated mouthpiece has a tendency to be a little bit slippery on my lips, but this acrylic mouthpiece top grips my lips a little bit better. So regardless of how wet my lips get because I'm sweating, this mouthpiece has a tendency to stay in place much better. Also, an added perk of this acrylic top is that it stays relatively the same temperature. So regardless of how hot or cold it gets, the mouthpiece will always feel the same. So after looking at all these components of the mouthpiece, I encourage you to experiment with each one of them. Go to a music store and play on all their mouthpieces, or find some friends and teachers and play on their mouthpieces and see what works best for you in different situations. So have fun experimenting.